Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Bradley, and I'll be speaking to you today about marijuana prohibition as a representative of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, otherwise known as L.E.A.P. The mayor's already said pretty much everything I was going to say, so I'm ready to take questions now. Just kidding about that. These photos that you see here is just a few of L.E.A.P speakers. The guy in the middle on the right, next to a marijuana plant that took 2 deputies making $20 an hour, a sergeant making $26 an hour, and 2 investigators making somewhere in between half a day to pull out the ground. I was really proud of the picture when it was taken, and a lot more like it, but not so much lately. I've had a change of heart over the last few years since I left law enforcement in 2011. In fact, when I was in law enforcement, I left the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office. I was a patrol sergeant there. I consider myself for a long time the tip of the spear in the war on drugs, and made a lot of small arrests. The other people in the photos, like I said, they're some of L.E.A.P's most notable speakers, and truthfully some of the most knowledgeable drug policy experts in the world, in the entire world. L.E.A.P itself, we are an international educational nonprofit coalition of police officers, judges, prison wardens, prosecutors, federal agents, people like that, other law enforcement professionals that have served on the front lines in the war on drugs. And we believe that that prohibition of drugs like marijuana is the wrong way to make our streets safer. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that, and the mayor's already mentioned most of it, so we should breeze right through it. And we now have over 200,000 members worldwide, so that's really cool. We're growing by leaps and bounds. The first thing I want to make clear is that marijuana prohibition has transformed our country. As the mayor said, he's 33 years old. For every year that he's been alive, marijuana prohibition enacted by, for the most part, by President Nixon in the war on drugs has been in effect. So the U.S. has 5% of the prison population. You know what our 5% of the population of the planet, you know what our prison population is? Or we've got 1/4 of the world's prisoners. And there's something wrong with that, and so what's supposed to be the freest country on the planet. We have the largest per capita prison population in the world. 50% of those federal prisoners and 25% of the state prisoners are in jail for drugs. And we haven't always had more people in jail than any other country. This all began a little over 100 years ago with the Harrison Drug Act. Really, it didn't go into full effect until Richard Nixon declared war on drugs in 1971. And he did that after the Schaefer Commission, after former Republican governor from Pennsylvania, the Schaefer Commission examined the use of drugs, especially marijuana, in our society, and made a recommendation back to President Nixon and to Congress that marijuana should be decriminalized and we should discourage use by other methods. Obviously that didn't happen. We went kind of the other way. So as you can see here at the beginning of the so-called war on drugs, police made about 2 marijuana arrests per hour back in the late 60s and early 70s. Now we're making about 80 arrests per hour across this country. And this has been a Republican and Democrat issue along the way through the years. They've all piled on more and more sentencing rules and drug charges, and they've made the drug war more hard for people. And right now, every year we're arresting 750,000 people for marijuana, 250,000 people just for weed. We're going to spend $70 billion this year on the war on drugs, which is about half of what the U.S. government spends on education. So the folks that are responsible for creating the drug war, I know this is kind of hard to read, but there's no way to put it in an easier method I've tried. But the folks that are responsible for creating the drug war have laid out 3 things that they say will happen if fighting the drug war is successful. They have a 3-fold strategy. And that's to decrease the supply of drugs coming into the country, reduce demand for drugs domestically, and to reduce the negative consequences of the drugs. And I think we all know that it just has not been successful. It has not in the slightest. L.E.A.P speakers from all different law enforcement careers have tried and failed to stop marijuana from being imported, distributed across the country, and sold on the street. Marijuana itself is a cheap plant, but because it makes so many stops along the way, profit gets tacked on because you have to make huge profits off of something that's illegal. And so the prices rise at each stop in the supply chain. So an ounce of tobacco, if it costs 13 cents, what do you suppose an ounce of marijuana costs? Tobacco is 13 cents. We're growing it all over the country, legally and regulated. Marijuana goes for about $400 an ounce. It's in between, it's about a third as much as an ounce of gold. Most of the marijuana arrests I made during my career, they were of young people, 17 years old, 18, 20 years old. And just to go back a little bit, you said 18 years earlier, Mr. Mayor, it's actually 17 in the state of Georgia that a person can be taken to jail, to adult jail. So it's actually a little worse. I've surprised a lot of 17-year-olds by taking them to big boy jail before. But like I said, most of the arrests I made during my career were of these young people. And, I started to put together in my head a pro and con list of the good things that were happening as a result of these marijuana arrests and the bad things. And even at the end of my career, when I still had some hope that the drug war might be useful for some people, I could still only put one or two things in the plus column. In the minus column, we have college careers down the drain. We have loss of financial aid. We have loss of, in certain cases, welfare benefits, housing. Can't get a job because of a criminal history. All over a substance that most people in this room have gotten away with when they were kids smoking. And what we're talking about is, when I'm talking about these young people, we're simply saying, okay, you got caught with it, deal with it. And I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me anymore. And so that's why, that's one of the reasons why I left law enforcement. Government surveys show that kids have been using marijuana at pretty much the same rate for the last 20 years. And even if you go back further, about 20% of high school seniors say that they've smoked marijuana in the last month. And in between all that time, we've had 24 medical states come online. We got 4 or 5 recreational states. Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. Recreational marijuana is legal there. And all during that time, it still stays about 20%. So obviously, I mean, whether we make it legal or not, with the education and teaching our kids how to make good choices, we say that. And I have no doubt that we could actually bring that number down. And we've done it with another drug. This is not the first time we faced this. We've been able to cut drug use in half for one drug over the last 20 years. Do you know what it is? It's tobacco. Teen cigarette use has decreased by 50% in the last 2 decades. We were able to achieve this huge drop by regulating tobacco and educating the public. That's why you don't see Joe Camel around anymore. So what we need to do is get out of the mindset that marijuana prohibition is holding back a flood of drug use. It's not. What's preventing us from marijuana isn't prohibition, it's education. And if the government were to regulate marijuana instead of use law enforcement to lock people up for it, in my opinion, and in the opinions of people in other states that have done this, we would see better results. We would see less teen use. Obviously, we're not talking about legalizing here in Clarkston. We're talking about something much different, which is, the notion of decriminalizing something. But the notion stays the same. So marijuana prohibition obviously doesn't stop supply and it doesn't stop demand. Criminalization simply isn't the right tool to use to stop people from using marijuana or really any other drugs, frankly. Remember that in addition to also reducing supply and demand, we're also trying to reduce the negative effects of drugs like marijuana on our society. You probably can't read the fine print there, but the government strategy calls for prohibition to reduce the crime, health, and social costs of the drug. But in fact, we're going to see that the war on drugs actually makes these negative consequences much worse. And some I've already mentioned about, loss of careers and education potential. But let's talk about crime real quick. One of the reasons we're fighting the war on drugs is to decrease the power of drug gangs and cartels. But thousands of people every year die in America, and 10,000 people a year in Mexico die because of our drug war. If marijuana were legal, analysts estimate that the cartels would lose roughly 1/3 of their revenue just from marijuana. If we relax the penalties on marijuana and regulated its revenues, would go into our economy and health system and prevention programs. But it's not working out that way. It's working the exact opposite way right now. And this is borne out by history too. In the 1920s, we had alcohol gangs, Al Capone and those guys. And the reason we don't see them anymore is because we ended Prohibition. And we didn't end Prohibition because we realized suddenly that alcohol was probably okay. We ended Prohibition because our cities and our families were being destroyed by gang violence from alcohol. It was a real thing, and I mean, I've never been to a speakeasy. I don't know if you guys ever have, but they're just not exactly very common right now because you can go to a liquor store and get your regulated, you know, drink or whatever. I'm sure you guys are aware of the brouhaha over the rape tests that piled up in several counties and Grady Hospital. It led to a very contentious bill this legislative session that passed by the skin of its teeth, but it now requires law enforcement to pick up rape kits from the hospital within 24 hours and submit them within a certain amount of time to the GBI crime lab. And after all the blame was passed and the bucks were passed around on this, it boils down to the fact of money and allocation of money is why this happened. And by shifting our focus from drug enforcement, specifically marijuana enforcement, which is the vast majority of drug arrests and investigations, then this money can be used for things like you know, testing rape kits and making sure that violent predators and criminals are actually brought to justice and not allowed to skate free for years because of this. Sorry. I can't get this thing to do quite what I want it to, I'm sorry. Right. Okay, so let's look at the murder clearance rates over the last few years since we started the drug war. We used to solve about 85 to 90% of murders in our country, and since that time, with the advent of CSI and fingerprints and the internet and all the technologies we have, we're clearing 20% less of the murders than we were all those years ago. Why is that? It's because we're spending our money somewhere else. And then one more thing I want to talk about is the subject of racial disparity in arrests, and I think you spoke a little about that too, Mr. Mayor. And the cold hard fact is that in America, nationwide, if you were black, you were 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than if you were white. A few years ago, the ACLU did a very comprehensive study on this. They published a paper called War on Marijuana in Black and White, and that's the number they found. They looked at arrest statistics for all 50 states and found that. In Georgia, it can be higher in places. See here in DeKalb County, it's 5.8 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana if you're black. So that racial disparity destroys trust between communities and police departments and law enforcement officers, and it keeps the law enforcement officers from being able to work with the communities in the way they should be able to prevent and solve major crimes. This is just further damage that the war on marijuana has done. That's why, you know, the majority of people who use marijuana feel like they shouldn't be hassled about it. When they are hassled about it, you know, I've locked up a lot of people for drugs, especially even for meth. Okay, so if you arrest somebody for meth, usually they go, yeah, I shouldn't have been doing that. Not so much for marijuana. People know it. I mean, it's, you know, we can argue about health effects and all that, but at the end of the day, 0 deaths is 0 deaths. So. And we can see what legalization did in Colorado. Thousands of people are no longer receiving criminal records. Possession charges are down more than 90%. In Washington, police courts and corrections save $28 million a year because they're not drowning in marijuana cases anymore. And they can use this money now to fight violent crime and to educate children and the public about the dangers of drug use and things like that. Colorado's taking in $140 million a year in tax revenue. That probably speaks kind of for itself. And there have been reports from Mexico and from the Border Patrol as well, is that the more we reduce the consequences of being caught with marijuana, whether we're talking about legalization or medical or even decrim, the more we do that, the more money we're taking out of cartel pockets. It's just basic math. There's no other way around it. And these are the marijuana-related convictions in the state of Washington. They're down hugely. So, you know, with that, the point of all of this is that, in my opinion, and the opinion of L.E.A.P, law enforcement is not an appropriate avenue for solving marijuana problems. It's a public health issue, it's a public safety or a public educational issue that needs to be addressed. And if we do it that way, then we can get the rates down. Like we've been holding steady at 20% for all these years. What if we took, you know, were able to actually regulate what was going out the door? It would go even down even further. I mean, drug dealers don't check IDs, so they just don't. But in summary, I just want to reiterate that not only is prohibition failing to stop marijuana use, but it also creates cartels and drug gangs, and it destroys lives through lifelong collateral consequences of marijuana convictions, lifelong. And it's a huge source of racial inequality in America today. And that's why myself and the other DEA agents and police chiefs and judges at L.E.A.P and prosecutors and federal agents, all of these guys that take their time to go out. I hate public speaking, but I can only do so much from behind the computer, and sometimes I have to make myself go out and do this. And this is why, because I strongly feel that we've wasted more money and more lives over this plant than anything else I can think of. Any other drug, anything else. And that is the conclusion of that presentation. Here's my contact information if anybody has any questions.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Question here?
Sure.
Yeah. So during your time with the Forsyth
County Sheriff's Office.
Did you ever? Well, I guess you know the question that we're looking at right now is related to municipal court. And so you never dealt with municipal courts?
Not so much. No, we dealt mostly with state court. We had a solicitor there and assistant solicitor. So mostly it was there. Occasionally I would end up in Cumming City Court or something, but that was pretty rare.
Okay. And so can you describe sort of a under 1 ounce possession, what was sort of the disposition, I guess, what happened after someone was caught, or maybe even start with how did you find out someone was possessing?
Well, it could have been several ways. Usually it was a traffic stop. I would walk up and smell it, or I was really good at just getting people to tell me they had it, and I would take it from them. But in Forsyth County, it depended on what the memo of the week was as to how we dealt with it. For the most part, we had to make custodial arrests. We were able to charge them on a uniform traffic citation, but they did have to bond out. In some cities, because of I think there is either law or case law. I don't remember. I think you mentioned it earlier about being able to internalize the like the marijuana possession and disorderly conduct and those sorts of charges. Maybe it doesn't go on the criminal record, but there, everything is on the criminal record. Absolutely.
You have a question?
And so, in terms of can you kind of estimate sort of this, if someone did get arrested and you took them in, do you have a sense of in Forsyth how much money that individual might have spent?
I really don't. But so usually, if I had to go to court, which was rare, because most people don't go to court. I mean, that's a subject for another day. Y'all should go to court and say not guilty. But if somebody went to court, then they would, the maximum fine for misdemeanor in Georgia is $1,000 a year, up to a year in jail. Nobody goes to jail for marijuana in Georgia for less than an ounce per year. I hope. First offense, I hope. But that's, it depends on the judge, and usually what plea deal is handed out. But you're looking at $800 or $1,000 in fines, plus court costs, plus probation fees. Those private probation companies are making theirs. So it's substantial.
Yeah, and then just a follow-up. And so just to add, if you arrested someone out there on a traffic violation, then their car would be towed.
Yeah, if they didn't have a licensed driver that could be responsible for it, absolutely. Yeah. Car towed, all those expenses. That's a couple $100 after you pay for towing and storage and all that. And it would suck up 3 hours of my time to arrest somebody for a little sack of marijuana. And then I have to go to court. So, at the end of it, I was making $25 an hour when I left. So you can do the math on that. It's really expensive to arrest people for marijuana.
Right.
Not just for them, but also for the government.
And then last question I had,
Yes.
and so in terms of driving under the influence,
Yes.
can you just sort of distinguish between, a traffic stop, and then you smelled marijuana, or was there ever a situation where someone, was so high that they were a danger to other
So I did make a few marijuana DUI arrests, not that many, because when I was in law enforcement, they were kind of hard to prove because there was no per se limit for like blood tests and things like that. The legislature, I think, corrected that this year. I think it's like 4 nanograms per milliliter, James. I don't know, two nanograms. So it's really low threshold. But for the most part, people that smoked marijuana weren't the problems either on the roads or at their homes or anywhere. They weren't out at the bars raising hell, pardon my French. They weren't, they weren't beating up their wives because they were high. I mean, and for the most part, they didn't run off the road. The worst thing you probably expect them to do is drive too slow. That said, I think DUI is really bad. I don't think it should happen. And I think if you drive under the influence of something, you should probably go to jail. So, by reducing penalties on marijuana and marijuana possession, that doesn't necessarily mean more people are going to drive under the influence. I think we've done a good job so far getting the message across that DUI is a bad idea. And the money we save from all these marijuana arrests, let's educate the public and say don't drive stoned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one more question. Okay. Sure. And so in terms of in sort of the ticket-only offense paradigm, Orlando City Council, I believe, just passed.
Orlando, Tampa, West Palm. And and lots of other cities, really great. What is your opinion on second, third offense? Do you see that in a calendar year? Do you see that as a sort of a lifetime sort of period? I mean, what are your thoughts on how you do with repeat offenders? I think you're asking the wrong person because I don't feel like I deal with a lot. James can tell you how many medical marijuana patients I deal with on a daily basis. I don't think that simply being in possession of marijuana should be any offense. I mean, there may be certain cases where someone has been to jail for other things, maybe, and they're on probation, maybe they shouldn't be doing it. But I deal with people every single day that use marijuana for cancer and diabetes, and I have parents with children I talk to every day that have seizures. This is their life. This is their lifeline. If they don't have this, they could die. So I don't feel the same way I used to about cannabis. So I don't think there should be any fine anywhere, but I'm not a policymaker either. So no problem.
Thank you. I'm Councilman Howard Iyasu. My question is pretty similar to what Mayor was asking. Have you ever, from your experience, you ever arrested anybody for driving under the influence of cannabis, even though he didn't have a possession?
I have charged. Well, if they didn't have possession, I don't remember. I don't want to say yes or no on that. I've made maybe 3 DUI marijuana arrests over 10 years, and I just don't remember. I made a lot of DUI arrests, and I just don't remember the details of all of them.
Most for alcohol?
Most for alcohol? Oh yeah, absolutely. If you want to talk about the problems with alcohol, if you guys have some time, I'm happy to talk about that, but I just don't recall.
Thank you.
Any questions from the public?
Yes, I'm Julie Winnan Williams here on behalf of Councilman Mario Williams. Thank you for being here, sir. And could you discuss just a little bit further the disparate impact of an arrest of less than an ounce of marijuana on race and socioeconomic class?
Well, sure. So, one of the misconceptions about marijuana arrests and drug arrests in general, if so many more black people than white people are being arrested, is that black people must use drugs more than white people, and it's just simply not true. Black people make up barely 13% of our population, and they make up the majority of our drug, especially marijuana arrests. And the reason for that is because of where we choose to do our enforcement. We're not out on Buford Highway looking for stuff, or out on major thoroughfares. We're in the neighborhoods. Looking for this stuff where these people live. So there's no question there's racially disparate arrests as far as white and black people. I mean, the proof's in black and white.
I want to mention that Mario Williams was unable to be here tonight, and his wife Julie. Thank you, Julie, for speaking on his behalf. He had a family emergency. Any other questions?
I'm Greg Reduca with Let's Be Clear, Georgia, collaborative to prevent marijuana abuse. I was just wondering if you could comment. The illegal drugs are the ones that actually kill most of us Americans: tobacco, alcohol, prescription drugs. With Colorado having legalized, and I know we're here talking about decriminalization, which is a good thing when accompanied by public health administrative sanctions, as opposed to legalization, which our statewide collaborative thinks is not a good idea. I wonder if you can comment about some of the things happening in Colorado. Fatal marijuana-related car accidents have doubled in the last several years there.
That's not true.
The youth
Could you
use
show me those
rates.
numbers? I don't believe that's true.
The youth use rates in Colorado are the highest in the country. The auto accident data has been validated. Sue will probably be talking about
Right, do you have that? Because I'd love to see that. I actually just read something yesterday and it was completely different numbers.
I
Do you have
don't
that
have it
handy?
with me, but I mean.
Okay, great. I'll pay attention when you talk, sure.